You can remember the exact words someone used to embarrass you in front of your whole class. 15 years later, you can still hear the tone of their voice, but you cannot remember what you ate for dinner 3 nights ago, even though it was probably fine, even though nothing went wrong. Your brain just let it go, like it was never even worth keeping. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't a flaw in your memory. This is your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. Because your brain was never designed to remember your life. It was designed to keep you alive, and those are two very different jobs. Let's start with the part that should bother you a little. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it the negativity bias. In 2001, a researcher named Roy Baumeister, along with his colleagues Ellen Bratzlowski, Katrin Finkenauer, and Kathleen Vose, published a paper with one of the most quietly devastating titles in psychology. Bad is stronger than good. They reviewed decades of research across relationships, learning, emotion, and memory, and they found the same pattern again and again. Negative experiences affect you more than positive ones. They linger longer. They influence your decisions more. They get encoded into memory with more force. One bad interaction with a friend can undo 10 good ones. One harsh comment from a parent can outweigh years of quiet support. Why would evolution build a brain like that? Why would it stack the deck against your own happiness? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Happiness never killed anyone. A missed threat did. Think about your ancestors for a second, not the version of them in museum dioramas holding spears, but the actual decision-making creature trying to survive another week. If they ate a berry and it tasted fine, that was a forgettable afternoon. If they ate a berry and nearly died, that memory needed to be permanent, instant, and impossible to ignore. A brain that weighted good and bad experiences equally was a brain that kept making the same fatal mistakes. A brain that overweighted danger, that burned threats into memory deeper than anything pleasant, was a brain that survived long enough to pass itself on. You are descended from the anxious ones. The relaxed ones, statistically, didn't make it as often. Now here's where the story gets specific, because this isn't just a vague evolutionary idea. There's actual brain architecture behind it. Deep in your brain sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. It's often described as your brain's alarm system, and that description is mostly accurate. The amygdala is especially sensitive to emotionally intense experiences, and it has a direct line to the hippocampus, the structure responsible for consolidating memories into long-term storage. When something frightening, painful, or humiliating happens to you, your amygdala essentially flags the moment as urgent. It tells your hippocampus, remember this one in detail. Remember exactly where you were standing. Remember exactly what they said. Remember exactly how your stomach dropped. A neuroscientist named Elizabeth Kensinger at Boston College has spent years studying this exact mechanism. Her research found that negative memories aren't just remembered more often. They're remembered with significantly more sensory detail than positive or neutral ones. You don't just remember that something bad happened. You remember the room. You remember the smell. You remember the specific sentence. Positive memories, by comparison, tend to blur into something softer, something more like an impression than a recording. So when you replay an old argument at 2 a.m. with perfect clarity, your brain isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do, with a precision that would be genuinely impressive if it weren't happening to you specifically, at the worst possible hour. But there's a second layer to this, and it has less to do with danger and more to do with how your mind tells the story of your own life. The psychologist and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how people evaluate their own experiences, and he found something strange. There are essentially two versions of you living inside your head. There's the experiencing self, the one who lives moment to moment, who feels pleasure or pain in real time, and there's the remembering self, the one who looks back afterward and decides what the experience meant. Kahneman discovered that the remembering self doesn't average out an experience. It doesn't calculate the total. Instead, it weighs two things almost exclusively. How intense was the peak moment, good or bad? And how did the experience end? This is called the peak end rule. A vacation with one terrible afternoon can be remembered as a disaster, even if the other 9 days were wonderful, simply because the peak negative moment dominates the story your mind tells. Meanwhile, the small, steady pleasures, The ones without a sharp peak barely register at all in memory. Pleasant but unremarkable experiences essentially evaporate. Painful or shocking ones get carved into stone. This explains something that probably feels familiar. Why a single moment of public embarrassment can outweigh years of quiet competence in your own self-image. Why one bad review can sit heavier than 50 good ones. Why the worst thing someone said to you in a relationship can echo louder in memory than years of ordinary kindness. It's not that the kindness didn't happen, it's that kindness, by its nature, rarely produces a peak. It doesn't spike. It just exists steadily in the background, and steady things are exactly what your memory system was never built to prioritize. There's something else worth sitting with here. This bias isn't just personal, it's social, and it's been shaping human behavior for a very long time. Anthropologists studying small hunter-gatherer groups have noted that warnings, threats, and cautionary stories spread through a community far faster and stick around far longer than stories of routine success. If someone in your ancestral group ate a plant and got violently sick, that story would be told and retold for years. If someone ate a different plant and simply had a fine, unremarkable day, nobody tells that story at all. Over generations, this created a kind of inherited caution, a cultural memory shaped overwhelmingly by what could hurt you rather than by what was simply fine. You inherited that same instinct. It's why bad news travels faster than good news. It's why a single scandal can define a person's reputation more than a decade of good behavior. It's why algorithms on the apps you use every day have learned, whether intentionally or not, that outrage and fear get more attention than contentment. They didn't invent your negativity bias. They just discovered it was already there, sitting quietly in every human brain, waiting to be activated. So what do you actually do with this information? Because knowing your brain is wired this way doesn't automatically fix the 2 a.m. replay of an old argument. But it does change what that replay actually means. It's not evidence that the bad moment was more important than everything else in your life. It's evidence that your memory system is old, and it's still running software designed for a world with predators and poison berries, not performance reviews and group chats. Researchers studying resilience, including work led by psychologist George Bonanno, have found that people who recover well from hardship aren't the ones who stop noticing negative events. They're the ones who learn to deliberately notice and dwell on the good ones for longer, essentially fighting against a system that wants to let the good moments slip away unrecorded. Some psychologists call this savoring. It sounds soft, almost trivial, but neurologically it's closer to resistance training. You are forcing your hippocampus to treat a pleasant moment with the same seriousness it automatically gives a painful one. You are, in a very literal sense, going against millions of years of design. There's a strange kind of relief in understanding this. The argument that still stings, the comment you can't stop replaying, the embarrassing memory that surfaces at the worst possible moment. None of it means you are uniquely sensitive or unusually unlucky. It means your amygdala did its job a little too well for a world that mostly doesn't exist anymore. The threats you face today rarely require split-second survival memory, and yet your brain still files an awkward conversation the same way it would once have filed a predator sighting, complete with detail, urgency, and a request to never forget it. You can remember the exact words someone used to embarrass you 15 years ago. You still can't remember what you ate for dinner 3 nights ago. But now you know why. It was never about importance. It was never about what actually mattered most in your life. It was about what your ancestors needed to survive another week, encoded into a brain that never got the memo that the danger had mostly passed. The bad stuck because sticking once saved your life. The good slipped away because, for most of human history, being content was never something you needed to remember. It was simply something you were occasionally, briefly, allowed to feel.